Fine. So we started a new chapter yesterday. So right now we're talking about an animal that had trouble giving birth, and what you can and can't do. And basically, the question is which parts of an animal are kosher and especially when the fetus that's cut up. At what point it's kosher? The question, the statement that we started with the Gemara with was that if you cut a limb off, if an animal is partially born, then you slaughter the mother. The fetus is still kosher except for the part that was stuck out already. And we're trying to decide whether that's true or not. And we had a verse that seems to permit the baby, and we're saying no, it's permitting the part of the baby that's inside. And what is it teaching us? It's teaching us that as long as the head hasn't come out, then the animal is not considered born yet, and it's still permitted. Whatever's inside is still permitted with the slaughtering of the mother. Then we ask the question, but we know that already. We have another Mishnah talking about a human being that tells us that if a human being sticks his head out, then he's considered to be born with respect for inheritance. And so why do we need to say it twice? That was the question we left off with. That's the question we left off with. We're up to V'chitema. So in counting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 lines up from the bottom. In other words, V'chitema is being in the line. The question is, why do you need both? And maybe you'll say, Ashmin and Ba'adam, it talks about a person, V'kamash V'lan B'Behema, and it talks about an animal. That's why we need two separate ones. The Adam and Behema Lo Yolef, because a person you can't learn out about a person from an animal. Why? Because there is not an entrance way for an animal that there's the birth canal basically is shaped differently, and therefore you might think that with an animal, then what's it called? By an animal, it is that once the head has come out, then it's there. That's why when the head comes out, it's born already, since the birth canal is much shorter. But by human being, it's less. So you say it's not yet born yet. And you can't learn an animal from a person to chashiv parts upon him today, because a human being, maybe you say human being is considered born if head comes out, because human being heads are very important, the face and the head, that matters much more by human being than by an animal. So maybe you'll say that's why you need that. No, Hanamitin, we taught that already as well. Shilya, you have an amniotic sac, Shiyatzis amiktas, so that part of it came out. Asur b'chila, and we're talking about an animal. Asur b'chila, you cannot eat it. Why? Because maybe the head was in the part of it that came out and is considered to be born. So you see, by animal, you already have another source by animal, and once the head comes out, then it's considered to be born. Now the Bride continues, Siman Vlad B'Isha, Siman Vlad B'Hema. It's a sign of a baby in a woman, it's a sign of a baby in an animal, that there's an exactly there's a baby there. So EMR, if you said Bishlama, it's fine. The first part in our mission, when it says he brought the arm back in, Daf Katana, that comes to teach us that even the arm is permitted. You can say Seifa Ataresha, Tana Seifa Ataresha. The end part of the time, but the head coming back in, it doesn't teach us anything new, because we know that from the other case. That's okay, because we only said that we brought the arm back in because the head brought in. It's the other way. The arm brought in taught us halacha that you can even eat the arm, and the head brought in taught us was extra, just saying it's parallel to the first case, and that's why we said it. But if you said low duration dafka, low safety dafka, so the first part bring the hand back in makes no difference. The second part bring the head back in makes no difference. Then why do we care about bring the head? Why do we mention it all? There's no reason talking about coming back in, and bringing it back in makes no difference, doesn't help at all, doesn't hurt at all. And why, in either case, do you mention bring the head in? In neither case, the bringing it back in teaches anything. Why should we teach it all? It says, no, olam really uber. It is talking about the body, like we wanted to say the whole time. when it says that when the animal sticks his hand out and brings it back in, then you do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. No, then the animal is permitted, but not the arm. It's saying when it says what's permitted, it's permitted only when it says permitted, only the animal, but not the arm. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. And what is he teaching us? It's like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak taught us elsewhere. We'll see shortly. Lo nitzrecha ela b'makom chadach. Yitzchak said a different case. That wasn't telling us permitted the edge of the cut. So if the animal, we'll see what case Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is talking about. But over here, hachinam in our case also lo nitzrecha ela b'makom chadach. That what you needed to teach us is the part right where you cut it off. That is, if the arm was out of the mother when the animal was slaughtered, then you have to remove a little bit of the arm, whatever part that did not come out, a little bit more that did not come out, you have to cut off because since it was outside when the animal was slaughtered, and it forbids a little bit of what's connected to it. If the animal mother brought the arm back in, then only the part that is actually physically outside the body is prohibited. But anything inside the body is going to be permitted. As we'll see more of that shortly. So we're saying now that when it says the animal stuck its arm out and brought it back in, it's permitted. We're saying the animal is permitted up it to the exact spot that it went out. Suppose if it hadn't brought it back in, it would be you have to remove some of the part that was still inside, and then eat the rest. And it's telling you that in case of bringing the arm back in, it's just the part that's connected. The part that is touching the part that was out is permitted. And it's teaching the part that the head stuck the head out, it's born. It doesn't teach us anything. He just said parallel to this part. So he knew that the head being born from somewhere else. Okay. Another proof. Now 6 lines up on the bottom. Tashma, come see. Behema, Bryce is similar to our Mishnah. Behema kasha leiled, an animal that's having trouble giving birth. Hotzi uber es yado vechzira. If the baby stuck in his hand and brought it back in, and then you slaughter the mother, mutar bechil is permitted to eat. Shachat is the aim. If you slaughter the mother for achach and then you brought the arm back in, it's permitted. It's prohibited to eat. Now, this is cryptic. So what is prohibited? What is permitted? Sounds like the animal. Like, what is it talking about? Talking about the animal. That the animal is permitted if they brought his arm back in, but the animal is not permitted if they left the arm out. Doesn't seem to make sense. That maybe some of the so we're trying to say maybe it's some of the arm. The arm is prohibited if it's outside when it's slaughtered, but the arm is permitted when it's inside, which is not like one we said want to say earlier. Hotzi is yado, the second hand out of the and then you cut it off. The aim, and then you start the mother. Shebechutz tameh, whatever is outside of it is now tameh, as in the nevela was not slaughtered. Va'asar, and it's prohibited from eating. Whatever is inside, tahor is pure, umutar is allowed to eat it. Shachar is the aim, you slaughter the mother for achachatcho, and then you slaughtered it, and abasar maga nevela. Then the meat of the animal is going to be meat that touched a nevela. That is, when the fact you cut the arm off it, the baby was never slaughtered, so this arm that was stuck out is going to be nevela. Nevela is tameh. And then the rest of the animal was not alive anymore. And since it was not alive anymore, it's considered food, and food that touches the nevela is tameh. So the arm is tameh in and of itself, and the arm is ability to contaminate the rest of the body. Once you slaughter the mother, then that arm is now tameh, and it touches the rest of the body, and now it makes the body a first degree removed of tumah. The hand will be what's called an av, a father category of tumah, and the rest of the baby will be a rishon tumah. Removed because it touched the nevela, touched the part of the arm that was outside when the mother was slaughtered. Divrei Meir, not to enter Meir. Chachamim Omrim, the sages say, maga treifa shchuta. It would touch a treifa that is slaughtered in an animal that was not kosher for some kind of physical problem. Generally, we say is what's called a treifa, that slaughtering helps it to remove the tumah. Any animal that just dies on its own is tameh. It's a nevela and it's tameh. If you slaughter it, even if it's not kosher to eat, it has some kind of treifa, something that makes it not fit for human consumption. Nevertheless, that removes the tumah. So this animal was going to be slaughtered, even though slaughtering doesn't help from the hand. The hand was outside the mother. Nevertheless, the hand is going to be a tray. It is considered to be part of a treifa, not part of the vela, and will not be tameh. It will not make the rest of the animal tameh as well. But the arm will be prohibited from eating. So that's the whole brisa. But he's mentioned the previous from the beginning of it. Tanimia, however, taught in the beginning, ratio, the beginning of the brisa. Hoti uber is yadav echzira. It stuck. The baby stuck its hand down, brought it back in. Then he started the mother. Mutter b'chila, it's permitted to eat. Sounds like the time of the arm. My lava ava is not the limb that got stuck out. And you see, not like we wanted to say in the beginning. Saying, no, it's not true. Uber, it's time of the baby. Yeah, uber, it's time of the baby. Ema seifa. Say the next case, but not really the end. Seifa means end to the end. It's the second case. It's the end of the first half of this brisa. Shachan is emo. He slaughtered the mother. And then you brought the hand back in. It's prohibited to eat. Uber, if the first part is talking about the baby, the second part is clearly also talking about the baby because it's the same case otherwise. My usser, why is the whole baby usser? Answer is Kid Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, we still haven't gotten to the original place he said it. Now we're applying it to a second place. Lo nitzicha, you don't need it except the malkum chatach, only the part that at the edge of the cut, right, the part that's just inside of where it was stuck out, the edge of it, if it brought the arm back in, then you just cut off whatever was outside, and when the rest of it is permitted. But if it was still out where the animal started, then you have to remove the edge of it as well. You have to go a little bit deeper. That's also going to be prohibited. And it says, Ini, is this true? We're trying to say that whatever was out is prohibited, even if it brings it back in. But when Avimi came from the house of Chozai, he came, he brought a new brisa we hadn't heard before in his hands. The brisa says this: Pirsa, parsa hechazir, its hoof, it stuck out. Achol, you can eat it. Parsos hechazir, its hooves, it stuck out and brought it back in. Achol, you can eat them. So it stuck out one hoof, brought it back in, you can eat it. Say two hooves and brought it back in, you can eat it. So what's the case? My love hechazir parsa, achol parsa. What does it mean? You bring out a hoof, eat the hoof. So you see, you can eat the hoof, even though it went out, you can eat it. Said, no, it's not true. Hechazir parsa, achol uber. I brought the arm back in, you eat the whole baby. You want to ask, hold on, eat uber, if it's some of the baby, my hechazir, what does it mean? Why doesn't it have to say you brought it back in? If you're alone hechazir, nami, even if you didn't bring it back in, the rest of the baby is clearly permitted, because it's not considered born yet. So what does it mean that if it brought it back in, it's permitted? It should make no difference if it brought it back in. Here's the original source of the statement on Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, "Lo nitzricha, you don't need an el except for a case l'makom chataf." We're talking about the edge of the place where you cut it. As it brought it back in, you can eat right up to the spot that went out. If you did not bring it back in, and whatever's outside is prohibited. And you have to take a little bit more than that as well. The place where you cut, that also is going to be prohibited. Now, if you're wondering, why is Rav Nachman need to say on the third case and not the first? So the Gemara was not written in order. So we had three different questions. The way the Gemara arranged it, we asked the question from the Mishnah first, and we asked this question, the question from the second brisa, and then we asked for first brisa, and then we got to the second brisa. And so this is the third time the Gemara is applying the halacha, or the answer Rav Nachman Yitzchak gave. But when Rav Nachman Yitzchak was learning, the first case he came up with had a problem was this brisa now. And since that was the first case he came up with, that's where he actually said this answer. Gemara is now applying his answer to other cases. And it makes it, and based on the way the Gemara set up, we put the cases in the order we set them up so that Rav Nachman Yitzchak's case is actually third. But nevertheless, when Rav Nachman Yitzchak was learning, he had the question on this third case, and he answered on third case, and we're just applying the other two after the fact. Okay, so anyway, so what we're saying is that it says the hoof is permitted. Why is it? What does it mean the hoof is permitted? So you stuck the hoof out and it brought it back in, then the entire animal, except for the part that was out, is permitted. Hand stuck in that you'd have to remove a little bit. Now the more has a question. It said the hoof stuck out and went back in, it's permitted. The hooves were stuck out and went back in, it's permitted. And these are based on verses. The verse says, with any animal with a hoof is permitted, any animal with hooves is permitted. It says, it's bringing two different verses only one halacha is teaching us, then why do we need two verses? What's the case? Love chada ever. One is telling us the place of the cut is permitted, and it's telling us even the whole limb is permitted. Why does it need to need both? Because if it only said one, you'd think it's only the place of the cut. Have to take both teachers, even the whole limb is permitted. That's our two verses to say the edge and as well as the entire limb are both permitted. He says, no, it's not what it's teaching us. One is talking about the place of the cut. As one, if you have an animal that has non-cloven hooves, that's inside its mother, has not been born. Now, as we'll see later, that is a machlokas. That Rabbi Shimon says, that case is not a machlokas. But in the case in general, if a kosher animal gives birth to an animal that seems to be of a non-kosher species, nevertheless, you have principle, hayotzim and tahor, any animal that's born from a kosher animal is kosher, and therefore this animal that does not have cloven hooves, that was born from a kosher animal, is permitted. Rabbi Shimon argues on that. Shimon says if it does not have the requisite kosher signs as cloven hooves, the animal is not kosher regardless of where it's born. So according to the rabbis, when the animal is born with not cloven hooves, it's permitted. For sure, it's permitted inside the mother. But Rabbi Shimon is saying that if it's born already, it's not kosher. But we learn out from this second verse to teach us that if it's not born yet, it's still inside the mother, then it is permitted, even though it does not have cloven hooves. Nevertheless, the baby is permitted since it's considered to be part of the mother, and the slaughtering works for it, and it's still kosher. So that's why we need the second. That's why we need the second verse. One verse tells us that when it sticks the hoof out, you can eat up to the spot that it was stuck out. You don't need to cut anymore. And the second case is teaching us, or the other one is teaching us that if it has not cloven hooves, it is permitted. When it says, believe the Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon said, Kalut ben Parah Asur. You have a non-cloven hoof, the son of a cow, that is prohibited. So like we said, just the more going to say it, I explained it, but the more we haven't actually read it. The more it says, Hani this Rabbi Shimon says is prohibited. It's only, these words are only said, only if the animal is born. If the animal is still inside its mother, Shari, it is permitted, even though it does not have proper hooves. Okay. Ula Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Ula says the name of Yochanan. He's arguing everything we said until now. The limb itself is permitted. If the animal stuck out a limb and brought it back in, and you slaughtered the mother, that the limb itself is permitted. Which reads in the Mishnah a little bit more simply. Amalei Rav Yehuda Ula. Rav Yehuda said to Ula, Rav Shmuel, but we had Rav and Shmuel, we quoted earlier. They both said, Aver Atma also, the limb itself is prohibited. Amalei, he responded, Man Yava mi offered to Rav Shmuel. Who could give us the dust of Rav and Shmuel, and fill up our eyes from it? Meaning, if Rav and Shmuel were here, then we could talk to them and find out what they're saying. But in the meantime, we can only understand what we understand. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Everything was included in Basar said Trefa lo seichelu. And we have a verse that says, an animal is torn in the field, you cannot eat it. Everything, in all cases of outside its boundary, were included there. Shapir lecha kasav, with the verse specified, gabe chatas, when it comes to a chatas, a sacrifice, a sin offering, shiatzasa chutz mechitzasa, when outside its designated boundary, a sin offering can only be eaten in the temple courtyard. So we learn out that if the meat of the chatas went outside the temple courtyard, the chazra, even if it went back inside the courtyard, it's still forbidden to eat. It says chatas it's only a chatas, is the chatas the one part Rachman that was excluded by the Torah for having left its boundary. Rachman about the Torah said about it, if it left the boundary, prohibited. But any other case it left its boundary, came into Hadar, if it went back to its normal place, Shari, it is permitted. Mesa, if you challenge against Ula and against Rabbi Yochanan. So we have Rav and Shmuel say if it brought back in, it's still prohibited. The only difference is where the cut happened, that's permitted if it brought back in. And Ula says in the name of Yochanan that if it brought it back out, then the whole thing, and brought it back in, the whole thing is permitted. So we challenge to that. Basa was said at Treifa, an animal that was in the field was torn. Lo sechel, do not eat. Matam alone, what does it teach us? We found about Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is the second tithe. The halach of the second tithe is you bring it into Yerushalayim and eat it yourself, and with whatever guest you want to invite, you have to be pure. It has to be pure, and it must be eaten in Yerushalayim. So Meiser Sheni, Bikurim are the first fruits that when you have first fruits blossom, you tie a little string around it to note that which are the first fruits, and then when they're ripe, you harvest them, bring to Yerushalayim, and they're given to Kohanim. They must be eaten in Yerushalayim. Shal v'shiyatzu, we find by both these foods, even though they went outside their boundaries, chutz mechiz is on outside the boundary. L'chaz, they went back in mutarim, they're permitted. L'chaz, you have to eat them in their boundaries. But they don't become prohibited when they left. So we heard about Meiser and Bikurim. The tithe is Meiser Sheni in the second tithe. If they left the boundary and came back in, they're permitted. Yochel, you might think, Af Zekain, even the Chatas is the same thing. As long as it's in the boundary when you eat it, it's okay. The verse says, Treifa. Treifa, an animal is torn. My Talmud, what are we learning here? The Gemara is asking on this brisa that says that you learn out from the word Treifa, what exactly do you see the word Treifa? Rav says, Treifa, it's similar to a Treifa. Ma Treifa, what's the connection to Treifa? We learn out from Treifa. Once it became a treifa, shuv ein laheter, it cannot become permitted again. The animal is injured, then it's injured, it can't get better. An injury that makes a treifa means it can't get better. If it get better, it wouldn't make it treifa. So just like treifa is permanent prohibition. Afasa, so too flesh, once it's left its boundary, shuv ein laheter. It has no permissibility to it. So once the animal stuck its arm out, it's prohibited at that point. Ula agreed to that. Ula only said that it brought it back in, it's permitted, but he agreed that once it stuck its hand out, it's prohibited. And the verse says anything, the moment it's prohibited, it stays prohibited forever. So this contradicts Ula. It says, you're right, it does. Tiyufta de Ula, tiyufta. A disproof to Ula, it is a full disproof. It says the word tiyufta twice to tell us that there's no way around it. And it says tiyufta once, it tells us that it's a disproof, but maybe there's a solution. It says tiyufta twice, it is a knockout. And so Ula has been eliminated. We've proved the first opinion in Rav and Shmuel that if the animal stuck its arm out, the arm itself is prohibited. The rest of the animal is permitted. But stuck it back in, then the entirety of the rest of the animal is permitted. If it did not stick it back in, then you have to remove a little bit past place of the cut is prohibited as well. Slightly new topic. Omar, the master said, we just said in the Gemara, we say about Meiser Sheni and Bikurim, we found about them that if they go out, they can come back in, it's permitted. What's the source? Brisa says we have a source for this. What is that source? The verse says, Lo sucha lechal b'sharecha. You cannot eat in your gates, meaning everywhere you live. You don't have permissibility to eat it wherever you are. Meiser d'anacha, the tithe of your grain. Rather, b'sharecha, you have to eat it within your gate. So the Gemara says, b'sharecha, in your gates, huda lo seichel. You can't eat it in your gates. The prohibition is to eat it outside Yerushalayim. That's so only if it's physically outside Yerushalayim. But yatsu chutz mechitzis, and if they went outside the boundary, v'chazor went back in, mutar, they are permitted. So you'd say it's only, the prohibition is learned out from the gates. You cannot eat it in your gates. Whatever is in your gates, meaning outside Yerushalayim, you can't eat. But it's only while it's in your gates that's prohibited. It's not prohibited once it comes back to Yerushalayim. In Eretz Yisrael, in the West, literally, it's taught this way. Here's the way we have a discussion. Rav says, Yesh later levarim. There is such a thing as a limb being born. Yochanan says, Ein later levarim. There's no such thing as a limb having been born. My binaya, what case are they arguing about? What difference is it making if the limb has been born? Why does it matter to us if a limb is born? The limb is not the animal. Ikanaya, this is between them. The Meser mute aver shebivnim, to prohibit the part of the limb that's inside. If you say just like we said with an animal, when the head comes out, when the majority animal is out, the animal is born, and even what's inside is considered to be born as well. So too, you say the same thing by a limb. If the majority of a limb comes out, that limb is going to be born, and you cannot eat any of that limb. If you say no, there's no such thing as born by limb, only an animal is born, limbs aren't born, then only the part that actually physically came out past its boundary, only that is prohibited. But any part of the animal that was inside, even the rest of that same limb, is going to be permitted. That is their argument. Now, Iboilu, the Gemara has a question within this statement. The Divrei Omer, according to the one who says, Ein le levam, there's no such thing as a limb being born. So this question that says there is such thing as a limb being born, this question will apply. According to the opinion that says there's no such thing as a limb being born, and therefore whatever is out is out, whatever is in is in. Hotzi over es yado vechzira. The baby stuck out his hand and brought it back in. Hotzi es yado vechzira. And that stuck its second hand back out and came back in. Until eventually it stuck out the majority of its body. So according to the opinion that says there's such a thing as limb being born, once it stuck its hand out, that limb is called born, and therefore, if you sticks out enough limbs to make the majority body having come out, for sure the animal's going to be born because each limb itself was born. So there's no such thing as born a limb; it's only that it left its boundary. So each limb left its boundary, but it was one at a time, and therefore, since the majority of the body left its boundary, then you could at least entertain the possibility that whatever didn't come out is not out. The animal was never considered born, since it did not stick its majority of its body out at the same time. To me, I'm reading, do we say hanafik le ruba, majority of it has come out? Or Dilma, perhaps we'll say it came to harder, since it went back in. It was, like I said, it's prohibited, but it's not considered born, and therefore, since the majority it was never out at once, the animal was never born, and you can eat whatever part of it was not out. If you find to say came to harder, whatever went back in is now back in, meaning you say the majority of the animal has gone out, so the majority can't be eaten, but the rest of it was never considered born, you can eat the rest of it. If you say that's true, then you have another question, a follow-up question. The animal stuck its hand and you cut it off. Because another hand you cut it off. Until the majority has come out, so you've now cut off the majority of this animal, but one piece at a time. There's no point that the majority that was attached to the animal is out at once. What's off in that case? Do we say hanafik le ruba? Majority of it is out, since whatever is out never went back in. You cut it off, it never went back in. So that's for sure considered out. Or Dilma, or maybe ruba babas achazin, you need majority at once, and while it's attached to the animal, has the majority out at one time, even though majority of the animal is out. But since it's removed from the body, it's not called out, and therefore you don't say you have a majority of the animal at once, and there's no point in time that the majority of the animal is out, and therefore it's not considered born. Tashma, we have a brisa that we're going to use to prove it. Zaklal, this is the general principle. The time I'm going back in the case of the Mishnah. Actually, it's not a brisa. This is our Mishnah. So the case of the Mishnah was the animal stuck its arm out and cut it and put it back in. So the other case, in the case of the end of the Mishnah, you cut up an animal inside to make it less painful for the mother, and then slaughter the mother. Anything that's if you cut part of the mother inside when you stuck the knife in, then you might have cut part of the mother. Anything that's part of the mother is also is prohibited. Since it's been cut off the mother at the time of slaughtering, the slaughtering does not affect it, and it's prohibited. She'ena goof, it's not part of the mother's body that got cut up. There's a baby, mutter is permitted. So what is it? What are we learning from him? She'en goofa, it's not part of the mother's body. This is vuyi mai. What case is coming to add on? It's not part of the body. It's permitted. Lavus vuyi ki agavna. Isn't it coming to teach us about this case that it's not part of its body, even though the majority of it is outside? Says no, that's not what it's teaching. Nothing to do with it. That's vuyi Kollel b'mei para. Teach us a case of an animal that does not have cloven hooves inside the mother. Believe Rabbi Shimon. But according to Rabbi Shimon, even though Rabbi Shimon said in general, Kalud ben para asur, an animal with non-cloven hooves, the son of a cow, is prohibited. That's only true when it entered the general world. But in the hands of inside its mother is shari, it is permitted. Now you can ask, why do we need two different verses for the same case? We said this earlier. That's what we said. These discussions are said in two different places. That in Eretz Yisrael, they said there's one way. This is the source of that halacha according to Rabbi Shimon. In Bavel, and the original version, that's the source halacha. These two versions argue. Each version will have to deal with the other verse and say, what do we learn from that verse? But but each version can say that we don't learn something different from this verse. That this verse is used to tell us that if you have an animal with a non-cloven hoof before it's born, then that animal is permitted. Even according to Rishon, if it be born, it's prohibited. Before it's born, it is permitted. Okay, continuing. Boy Rav Hanania. Hanania asked a question. Hotzi uber es yado bazara. If the baby stuck its hand out in the courtyard, Mahu, what do we say? What is the difference? He mentioned that the courtyard is a boundary. The rule is a baby sticks its hand out of its boundary, animal left its boundary, prohibited. What if it's left its boundary and went directly into a new boundary? It's in a fenced-in area of the courtyard. That's also considered a boundary. Do we say that the boundary that the courtyard is in means that the animal has never left its boundary, and that limb is going to be permitted? Migu dahavi, since it is mechitza, it is a boundary, the gabi kachim for sacrifices, hanan the gabi dahai, havinam the gabi dahai. So too, it'll be a boundary by the limb. Limb is not called having left its boundary, and the limb will be permitted, at least if it's stuck it back inside. Odelmar, maybe the gabi dahai, according to for the arm, la mechitzahu, it's not considered a boundary. It's not considered a boundary. That doesn't help. To mechitzas uber imahu, because what's the boundary for the baby? The mother. So it left its boundary. It went into another boundary, but it left its boundary. So why should the boundary of the courtyard help? Abaye says back to him, why didn't you ask a better question? Kachim kalim b'Yushalayim. That lower level holiness in Yushalayim. Why didn't you say that Yushalayim is his boundary? And therefore, the mother gave birth in Yerushalayim, and there's nothing that was giving birth. The baby stuck its hand out in Yerushalayim. Why didn't it say the boundary of Yerushalayim is considered a boundary, so the animal didn't leave? Why the only time an animal gave birth in the courtyard, talking about an animal that gave birth in Yerushalayim? My time alone. Why don't you ask that question? Look at me, boy. Why don't you ask that? The Chit says uber imahu, because the boundary for the baby is the mother. So Yerushalayim is clearly not going to help us. Hachanami, so too, the boundary of the Mechit says uber imahu, the boundary of the baby is the mother, and being in the courtyard in the temple is not going to count as the boundary for it. It left its boundary, and it is prohibited. Okay, new question. Boy Ilfa asked a question. Hotzi uber es yado bein siman l'semen. The baby stuck its hand out between the slaughtering. That is, there are two parts of slaughtering. As I'm sure you remember from earlier in Masechta, there's a trachea. There's a windpipe and the esophagus. The trachea and the esophagus. So you slaughter the trachea, and then the baby stuck its hand out and you slaughter the esophagus. So it was. Is that a question? Okay. So for sure that the limb is not going to be permitted, because it was outside when the slaughtering was done. The slaughtering is not considered done until you've slaughtered both the trachea and the esophagus. So we're not asking the question, is the limb permitted? We're asking the question, is the slaughtering effective such that it's going to be a treifa, not an avela? The general rule is that, as we mentioned earlier today, animal is slaughtered properly, but if it's sick, it is a treifa, it is not tameh. Animal is not slaughtered, it is nevela. So do we say that this slaughtering, just like you said before, that the slaughtering counts a limb that's not an avela? Do we say the slaughtering helps? But when the animal changed status in the middle, say it's sort of like a new thing. If the arm was out, then fine, the slaughtering helps because it was a halfway out animal. That was its status the whole time, status didn't change. But here, when it stuck its hand out in the middle of the slaughtering, the status changed, and maybe what happened to the animal in the first place doesn't count as connected to what happened to the animal in the second place. They can't combine since the animal changed its place in the middle, and therefore maybe the animal is going to be nevela. As the Gemara says, let's just read inside. So does mimit star if you can combine siman rishon, the first time in the trachea, let's siman sheni to the esophagus, a tar mini nevela to purify it from being a nevela, from the tumah of a nevela, a law or not. So Amar Rava says Kava Homer. We have a Kava Homer argument. Im Hoelo Simon Rishon the Simon Sheni. If you're going to say that the first two simanim can combine the hatir b'achila to permit the animal for eating, lo yoyelo shouldn't permit it latara midin nevela to permit it for nevela. See, these two things can combine. Since they combine, then they combine for everything, and the animal will be a treifa. The limb will be a treifa, not a nevela, and therefore it will not be tameh. Next question, boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. You may ask a question. Ma'u lachush. What is halach with regards to being careful, being concerned, lazaro, for its seed? So, hey, what case are we talking about? What case are we talking about? That if an animal that has a unique halachic status has a baby, is a father really of a baby, that we care about the father's status. What are we talking about? So this gets us to start this in an interesting topic, which is called a ben pakua. A ben pakua is an animal that was inside its mother when it was slaughtered, like we've been talking about. This animal did not die, this animal lived. So you have generally the cesarean section after the animal has been slaughtered, and you take out a live animal. We've said before, an animal that's inside its mother when the mother is slaughtered is going to be self-slaughtered. So the ben pakua was inside the mother when the mother was slaughtered. That means the animal is slaughtered, but it's alive and well and walking around. So now the animal you have a living, walking dead animal basically. The animal is locally considered to be slaughtered, even though it is alive and well. You do not need to slaughter it later, at least at a Torah level. By the way, there's been a lot of discussion. You can bring down the cost of meat by making ben pakua great. As we'll see later, when an actual ben pakua, at least according to some opinions, if it has children, those children can also be ben pakua. You could have whole generations of animals that do not require slaughtering. Why do we do it? Discussion why not? We'll see later in this Gemara that could really cause some major problems if you would do that. So we don't do it. But now we're asking a sub question that we'll see exactly what case we're talking about. We're talking about the father. The father was a ben pakua. How does that involve? And does that have an impact on the child? So we start out. Hey, what's the case that we're talking about? Worrying about the seed of the father. Elaim, we're talking about an animal that was slaughtered. It was inside the mother when it was slaughtered. Had relations with another animal, a regular female animal. My area high. Why are we talking about this case when it's only stuck an arm out? The isbe iser yotze that's considered to be having left its boundary. So why are we talking about the case we've been talking about is the animal stuck its arm out and the mother was slaughtered, and now the animal is going to be slaughtered, but the leg is not, and this animal now has relations with a regular female calf, a regular female cow, and has a baby. That calf, we're asking, why ask in that case? What difference does it make about the arm? Even a full ben pakua is fully alive when fully inside when the mother is slaughtered. You also have a question. Nami also would ask. The Amar Rav Mishasha, according to Rav Shasha, Divrei HaOmer, according to the one that says Chosheshin L'Zereh Av, that you worry about the seed of the father. Ben pakua, you have a ben pakua animal that was inside the mother when it was slaughtered. Habal Behema Malaisa came on a regular female animal. Relations of Vlad Ein Lo Tikkun. This baby has no way of fixing it because it's half slaughtered, half not slaughtered. Can't slaughter it because it comes from the father that was slaughtered already. Can't not slaughter it, coming from the mother was not slaughtered already. There's no way. This animal. This is one of the reasons why we don't want to raise farms of ben pakua. If you have these ben pakua farms, then every animal on that farm is permitted without slaughtering. If one of those animals gets out and mixes with the general population, you're now going to have animals that cannot be permitted no matter what you do, and mixing with the general population. What are you holding up? It's just he was holding up a safe try. I thought he was trying to show me something. Yeah. Okay. Right. So these would mix and with general population. You might have whole animals that are prohibited, and therefore we don't want to do that. So the question we're asking: if you're worried about this case, that an animal stuck in its arm and then had a child with a regular animal, it's making a difference about the arm. Even a full ben pakua, the problem. Certainly, the arm can't make it worse than that. So why are you asking me that case? I can't have the case we're asking about. So you do need it. Also, a ben bakur dekvasi. So you have an animal that was slaughtered inside. The mother was slaughtered after it stuck its arm out. Now has a child together with an animal that was a female animal that was inside the mother entirely when it was born. What would we say? Aver molid. Aver, the limb goes with the limb. Hatek levashari, and you have to cut off the limb of the baby, and it's permitted. Jumma mavalvo yulad. Maybe the fact that the limb is considered a father as well, and therefore dari, and then it mixes up, and now the baby has been born from a limb that's prohibited. Hadar Amar, he said, Pshita, Mavavazare, it's clear to me that it mixes up in the seed, that even if the whole animal was inside the mother except for the limb, it's going to mess up the baby entirely. If so, Suma Yoli Suma, that an animal was blind, it should give birth to a blind animal. A Kita Yoli Kita, the Kita and a limb that an animal missing a limb should not be able to give birth to an animal with that limb. Pshita Mavavazare. And therefore, we're sure that the seed is mixed up, and therefore, the whole thing is prohibited in this case. And we'll continue tomorrow, God willing. Have a wonderful day.
Just for the record.